referring article which empowers the Supreme Court to make rules, and then a judgment of this court again, it's I think in the NRO judgment which says rules framed under constitutional powers, i.e. the 1980 Supreme Court rules, stand on a higher pedestal compared to ordinary legislation. What does that mean?
If I may, with utmost respect, I know your Lordship in the Ghulam Mohiuddin case recently rendered judgment where the Supreme Court review law was held to be illegal. Your Lordship has expressed exactly that.
No, this is not our expression. That is a reliance on an earlier judgment of this court which says this.
My Lord, all I was trying to point out that the language of 188 and 191 in granting powers to the Supreme Court uses very different languages.
But you see, even this judgment that you are relying on, this also says that the Supreme Court rules are on a higher pedestal and promulgated on the basis of a mandate given by the Constitution.
Thank you.
Exactly यही कह रहा है.
Thank you for pointing out. Let me again, in relation to this judgment also, now clarify what this judgment has actually said and what it is purportedly argued that it has said.
No, argument apart, as Ladyship also pointed out, and as has been mentioned earlier, the judgment that you rely upon in itself lays down this, the ratio of the judgment is that the rule-making power, when exercised, when the rules are framed, then such rules stand on a higher pedestal for the reason that those rules have been framed in exercise of powers granted by the Constitution itself. And the powers granted by the Constitution under 191 are the powers granted by the Constitution to the Supreme Court and not to any other organ of the state.
My Lord, if we can just see page 536 of this judgment, on this point alone.
Before you come to 536, just one quick question. This sentence that you have read out to us from page 523,
yes,
which you regard as critical, is it your understanding that this is part of the ratio of the judgment?
Yes.
This is para 25 head note K जो है ना आपका इसमें पढ़े नहीं. In fact, the word subject to the provisions of any act उसको define किया है उन्होंने.
जी सर, मैं
बिंडर वाले केस में.
हाँ, मैं एक सेकंड.
साहब आप करें आर्ग्यूमेंट तो अपना करें ना.
जी. So I was trying to yes, page 536 of the judgment, my Lord, of the same judgment.
Mr. Zahid,
जितनी पढ़िए.
paragraph 36 is more relevant.
सर मैं उसी पे आऊंगा सर, अगर एक सेकंड के लिए. ये हायर पेडेस्टल वाली जो बात है,
जी
530 पेज 536 पे फर्स्ट पैराग्राफ. The Supreme Court rules are on a higher pedestal and promulgated on the basis of mandate given by the Constitution itself and not by a government, object whereof was to enhance the power of review as conferred upon the Supreme Court under Article 188 of the Constitution. One more time, just the first part. Supreme Court rules are on a higher pedestal. Higher pedestal than what? ये इसकी जो प्रीसीडिंग पैराग्राफ, प्रीसीडिंग पेज है, अगर हम उस पे जाते हैं,
इसलिए कहा है कि रिव्यू में पावर बढ़ाए में रूल्स ने.
सर इसमें ये
I'm trying to understand, Mr. Zahid Ibrahim. Please, can you complete your thoughts? Take the questions, note them. You keep responding to every query. I don't know what you're going to say next.
Okay, my Lord. All I was the point.
You were on 236 AA.
The
Yes.
point that I'm making is that in this judgment, when the Supreme Court says that the rules are on a higher pedestal because they are made under constitutional sanction, what are they saying? Higher pedestal than what? Higher pedestal than law or something else? They are saying higher pedestal than rules made on the basis of another statute.
No.
And
If you would,
if I may just
also-
complete, I will
complete.
complete.
If you would also read the NRO judgment, this point has further been elaborated by this court by saying once these rules are made, any subsequent legislation we may not follow. And we need not follow.
मैं मेरी सिर्फ आपसे ये गुजारिश है कि यहाँ पे जो कंक्लूजन हुआ है फुल कोर्ट का in relation to the Supreme Court rules being on a higher pedestal, that is not on a higher pedestal as compared to any law. And the reason why I say this is evident because this discussion started from page 500.
Can you just complete
page
your thoughts?
534, page 534 at the bottom of page 534.
Para 37.
Para 37, my lord. Exactly.
So Zahid, para 36 is very important.
चलिए जाहिद साहब आप प्लीज आर्ग्यू करिए एज यू
So
वांट
para 37 का ये I'm just reading-
जाहिद साहब अगर मैं आपसे सवाल ऐसा पूछूं जिससे मैंने फैसले ही कर रहा हूं तो आप कहें फिर सवाल ही नहीं बनता है आप अपना आर्ग्यूमेंट कर लें कंप्लीट फिर हम आपसे सवाल पूछ लें
I mean, I honestly feel that today, I mean, I'm trying to answer questions.
Yeah, पहले
I
argument
also
अपना
think that
complete कर लें ना।
they help in this debate.
जी
So I was just wanting to read para 37 from the bottom. मतलब जो in Roman font है उससे पहले वाला एक sentence. A line of distinction. In this regard, reference may be made to the case of Federation of Pakistan, Saeed Ahmed, PLD 1974. A line of distinction is to be drawn between statutory rules made by the executive pursuant to an act or an ordinance and statutory rules made by the Supreme Court pursuant to the mandate of Constitution as conferred upon it by Article 188 of the Constitution. ये जो sentence है, my lord,
a line of distinction
a line of distinction is to be drawn between statutory rules made by the executive pursuant to an act or an ordinance and statutory rules made by the Supreme Court pursuant to the mandate of the Constitution as conferred upon it under Article 188 of the Constitution. That is what is being...
Ajay, can you now go back to 536 AA?
If this line of distinction is drawn, Mr. Zahid Ibrahim, if this line of distinction is drawn,
Yes.
that which means that the rules made under 188 are of a different category altogether, then there's no need to say that those rules are at a higher pedestal. Then those rules and rules made which are normally called subordinate legislation fall into two different categories. It seems to me that the passage, that those words that you have just read out from page 536 on a higher pedestal is not vis-a-vis a category that the Supreme Court in the words that you have just read out,
My lord,
say fall into a totally separate and distinct category. And if this is correct, then the higher pedestal can surely be only vis-a-vis law and not subordinate legislation or rule-making power, which is of a totally different nature. Would that not be a proper reading of the judgment as a whole?
perhaps like the first sentence of paragraph 37, in fact, perhaps answers what your lordship is saying. Supreme Court itself says, in view of the above discussed principles of interpretation, it seems immaterial to discuss whether the Supreme Court rules are subservient to Article 188 of the Constitution. They say that is an immaterial argument. Where it draws a comparison and says that they are on a higher pedestal, that is only in relation to rules made under some other statute. That is the point.
आगे बढ़े, आगे
जी,
बढ़े.
जी, my lord,
And if you go back to 536 AA,
Mr.
now if you are to read this line disjunctively, object whereof was to enhance the power of review as conferred upon Supreme Court under Article 188 of the Constitution, then if you go to read it like the petitioners want us to read it, that would mean that the Supreme Court is not bound by Article 188 either. because it's giving it more power than the Constitution itself. Surely that cannot be the case. So it has to be read in context to the line that you read. I don't know.
I understand that, we are all pressed for time. I don't want to sort of...
हम पढ़ लेंगे पूरा judgment.
Malad, the next point I want to make is in relation to the appeal.
But before you go to appeal,
Before
you go to appeal, what do you say about entry 58 on which you rely upon? That entry 58 is, since it is not conferring legislative competence, the rules that you rely upon, rules of interpretation, the purpose of entry 58 is the negative aspect of those rules, to make sure that a competence given elsewhere other than the lists, that is totally outside the scope and power of provincial legislature. That's all that the purpose of 58 is. It does not confer legislative competence, and therefore the principles that you rely upon really don't apply. What would you say to that?
Malad, my response to that would be that...
Zaid Sahab, बहुत अच्छा सवाल है. Shall we take the break now, and you have received a number of queries, just mull them over, then you just be precise in your answers, because we will hear you, don't worry. So we can take a slightly longish, make it this lunch break as opposed to 1:30 and the prayer break or whatever we want to make it. Just make these questions are very valuable for food for thought, and just mull them over and respond to us.
I promise.
We'll just come back in half an hour. Is that all right?
I promise to continue, but I can't promise to be able to have all the answers to the questions posed.
You've seen what's been happening these last
Yes.
You should be ready for that.
I've tried, my lord.
आप लोग भी जरा रेपिटेशन ना कीजिएगा, कोशिश कीजिएगा, नए नए बातें कीजिएगा जो इन्होंने नहीं की हैं.